Well, everyone, it's time for the site landscape, the site landscape survey results. The site landscape has been a cornerstone of the work that SCRS has done for several years now. Mike will talk a little bit to some of the historical data that we've been able to collect. We use it to not only inform the site community on the information that you need to benchmark yourselves against your peers, but also for our industry partners to understand what's going on at the site level. We not only have the opportunity as an organization to bring this data out to the community, to our global impact partners with presentations and at other conference opportunities, but we also then have the opportunity to build programs and initiatives off of this data. We use this to drive what we work on and what we build for you as the clinical research site community. I want to make sure also that as we get into this presentation, that everyone understands that you will have access to these exact slides immediately following the summit, as long as you fill out the post-summit survey. So if you're interested in this data, you want to bring it back, you absolutely will have that opportunity. As we get started, it's my pleasure and honor to also welcome a couple of other individuals up on the stage, Dr. Audrey Escobedo-Escotto from Emerson Clinical Research Institute and Dr. Nadege Gunn from Impact Research Institute. I'm also joined, of course, by Pierre and David Vulcano with the SCRS team and Karri Venn, again, with Centricity Research.
All right, thanks, Jimmy. So we started the landscape survey in 2006. Christine, Pierre, and I started doing that because we used to teach this hidden cost course. That's where I met a lot of people here who knew me as Mike J, and they still call me that, and I respond to it still. We were doing hidden costs, and we were finding that while sites were learning about budgeting and contracting, they didn't know how each other were doing. They didn't know how many coordinators should I have, what kind of startup fee should I be asking for, and when they would negotiate, we would find out they were all being told that no one's asking for that, and then they all would say, "Well, I'm asking for that. What do you mean nobody's asking for that?" So the landscape was kind of like our first collector. So now you get surveys from us all the time, and we do post-webinar surveys and post-summit surveys, but the landscape was the first one. And what we did was we asked sites to pull 10 contracts from the prior year and answer a lot of questions based on those contracts, and it had to take 3 hours. But they did it. And so one of the things that I've been doing over this amount of time is trying to get that survey easier to take so you can skip right to the parts that affect you, so you don't have to go through the whole finance part if it's not your bag, and so that we can get as many responses as we can. We want to make it easy, fast, and reliable, and collect as many responses as we can get. And so we asked them topics like, how do you hire, how do you train, how do you store documents long-term, how much are you charging for that, how many trials can a coordinator handle? It was a very common question that sites just didn't know. They didn't know how many coordinators should I have. So we had all that in there. We asked them the kind of startup fees they got, what items am I getting in my budget, and we made it shorter, as I mentioned, and now we have separate landscapes as another way to make it easier to take and more accessible, separate landscapes for Australia and New Zealand, Europe. We have a technology landscape. We did the digital initiative landscape, all those kind of landscape surveys to collect this information, because as Jimmy said, it drives all the content. But your enthusiasm drives everything. So that's why we really, who took the landscape survey this year? Okay.
Not bad. I'd like to see better. We can do better.
Yeah, we can do a lot better. It's okay, I'll make my voice go up. So some of the topics we've covered in landscape surveys over the years. So we'll use kind of the post-webinar surveys and things like that to say, what other topics do you want to know about? And this is kind of a word cloud of the different things remember we did everything from COVID, we talked about workload, key performance indicators, we cover them all. So you'll see when you take it, there's usually a general section that repeats every time, and then some new thing that we're trying to track, and if it catches on, we'll keep going with it and replace it with something else, because we constantly want to give you all really up-to-date and accurate information of the topics that you are interested in. So just a quick summary of who took it this year. This has been pretty standard over time, the kind of sites that take it. Freestanding sites by far have the most people that respond. and then private practices, hospitals, as we get further down, academics, and then nonprofits. And that doesn't really change that much over time. Also, what region is your site located? Most of the time, it's highly North America. As you can see, I don't know if you can read it, but some of the graphs will show some orange pushing down from the top. That's Europe. And Asia Pacific is the gold band at the top. So some years we get a lot of European or AP contribution to the summit, which is why we now separate this off to collect their own information, because when we go there, we give them a landscape of just their area. Interestingly, the 2013 Site Solutions Summit, I thought it was interesting. 70% of people that took it in 2013 were not members of SCRS, but this year it's 83%. So the society is really driving the enthusiasm and the content for the survey. And 21 plus years, almost half the people that take that survey have been in the clinical trials industry for over 20 years. So I expect that the information we're getting is pretty good. So this brings me to my conclusion, which is the reason I really wanted to get up here, is it's about getting involved, and the survey is kind of the thing that drives it all. So each of you has skills and talents that make a difference in the industry, and so we need that involvement. So you want to join a community or an initiative, join a site advocacy group, you contribute to the online forum, and if you take a survey, even if you can answer one question, that would make such a difference. And imagine the power the sites would have if we could go to one of our GIPs and say, 15,000 people responded to this question. So that really shows that we are engaged and involved and enthusiastic. And I know as far as getting involved this weekend, sometimes it's uncomfortable if you're a first-timer or you're shy. If you want to meet anybody, just come to somebody in a crazy-looking shirt, and we will hook you up with anybody you need to meet, and we're all here to provide for you this weekend. And finally, your involvement matters, your voice, our community, our success. And so this all matters. Your involvement is what drives all of this. One more time. So as the slides say, ignite the possibilities this weekend. And is anybody going to get involved this weekend? There we go. See that? Thank you. Can you hand that to David? Thank you very much.
So I'm proudly wearing my shirt. You guys put jackets on. I'm just saying. So as both Jimmy and Mike mentioned, we use this data for presentations in other places, to advocate for the voice of the sites and do causes. Some of the data you'll see is age-old data. This one is a new one for us. Record retention has gotten freaking insane and out of control with this. It's something that the regulators, the GCPs of the folks, sponsors, sites, this is something that we're going to be focusing on a lot this year. And to be able to focus on it, we needed data. So these are new questions that were added so that we can get some data to support what we need to create as a society and how can we advocate for the voice of the sites. So we asked the sites in this, and what would your business needs, if there were no rules, no contracts, no regulations as to how long you would keep the study data? And 44% says, you know what, we don't really need to keep them beyond 2 years. 23% says, yep, 2 to 5 years. But you can see the great majority of these, we don't need to keep these as long as the regulators are putting on us or we're putting in contracts with sponsors and CROs. Now, we know we have to keep per regulations. We completely understand that. But one of the things is, I have my business needs, then there's my regulatory obligations, and then once the regulatory and business need obligations are over, there's what the contract says. And I'm basically, if I'm keeping them for 15, 20, 25 years, past my regulatory period, I'm now a record storage vendor for the sponsors and CROs. So sites, we asked them, do you want to be in the record storage business? And the answer was 68% said no. We don't want to do it. We have no idea what to do it. This is not our business. The sponsor or CRO has business needs for the records. We don't. So we'll keep them per regulations, but we do not want to be a record storage vendor for the sponsors and CROs. 32% says we are willing to learn this. Clearly, sponsors and CROs want this, so we would like to maybe learn how to do this, differentiate our site, and offer this service as a value add to our sponsors and CROs. So what does this data say? It's that there's no consensus in the site community as to how we should approach this. Therefore, our approach, at least currently, is let's make this the choice of the sites and have a real discussion about the benefits of taking those records and keeping those records for the long term, and how are they going to be, where should they best be held 20, 25, 30 years, or however long it's getting ridiculous with that. So obviously, budgets are always an issue. It's the kind of well, we'll throw $1,000 at it for the records and keep it for 25 years. And I dare say, I don't want to insult any of our site colleagues, but you hear a lot about it as, well, it won't be my problem in 25 years. Someone else will have to deal with it. That, to me, doesn't seem to be in the best interest of the records. But are the sites truly understanding what they're signing up to do? Remember, we're in 2023 being held to regulations and guidelines that were created in 1990s, when we did all studies on paper and we put it in a box and we shipped it off-site and we forgot about it. Everything's electronic now. If you want to be in the record storage industry as a site, that is fine. Just understand what you're signing up to do. You have to deal with electronics now, not just paper. You have media degradation. Right. How often are you supposed to change out your hard drives? Every 3 years. Check your warranties on those. Hardware obsolescence. Years ago, it was the orb drive. So if I had to recreate records from a study 25 years ago, I need to go on eBay to find an orb drive, get a Windows computer because the plug doesn't work with everything, that runs Windows 98 because the driver doesn't work. That's what I would have to do if I'm going to recreate them 25 years from now. Software obsolescence. You know, what happens when software vendors, they have it in their proprietary format and they go out of business? How are you going to continue that? Cybersecurity getting worse and worse and worse. And passwords for this stuff to secure? I can't remember my freaking password 25 days, much less 25 years. Okay? So we hope that you understand the business that we're getting in if you are signing up to be a record storage vendor for the sponsors and CROs. We will be having a breakout session on this later, tomorrow. If you're interested in this issue, we want to come together and see if we can come to some reasonable solutions so that we have stopping fighting about record storage and move forward now that we have a lot of the data to go forward on. So the summary of it, on the key takeaways, is most sites don't want to be in this business. We think it's in the best interest of the records for sponsors and CROs to recognize that after our regulatory obligations are done, they're better off with you all. But there are some sites that want to move forward and see if they can be in this business. And we have to decide if we're the Society of Clinical Research Sites or the Society of Clinical Record Storage to be able to give education out to the folks that want to be in that. It's a little beyond our competencies, but we will see what we can do. But nevertheless, Dr. Gunn, Dr. Audrey, Karri, where do you sit? Are you wanting to be the record storage vendor and enter into that business and learn that business to do that? Or are you on the camp of, it's not my business, I don't want to do this, the records are better off in the sponsors and CRO storage for their business needs?
No, thank you.
I'm surprised you actually had 30% that said yes, to be honest with you.
You're surprised at 30%?
I'm surprised.
Yes, I actually was too, but you know, it is the voice of the sites and we're here to listen to them.
Yep.
I would definitely say that, you know, FDA requires sites to retain for 2 years.
The little floating 2-year thing.
Exactly, at least for 2 years. And the Federal Code of Regulation 4546 would say at least 3 years. So I think that it's something that needs to be on the table. Sites will get around $750 in the budget when we negotiate with sponsors about to store, you know, for 10 years, for 15 years, because sponsors will go a little bit more stringent with their policies in terms of storage. And that's something that it really needs to be reevaluated and discussed. If I would say to you, you know what, I have these 2 boxes, take them to your home, store them for 10 years, or you know what, 15 years, I'll pay you $750. You know what, $1,000. That's the maximum that we'll get. And to store, you know, it'll take like $70 a month. If we do the math for 10 years, that's $7,000. So I think that's something that needs to be reevaluated. Sponsors need to think, how long do you need the site to store the documents, or reevaluate the budget?
I mean, we talked about how often are you actually getting the documents requested back after 5 years?
Yes,
Right.
yes.
It's never
often.
happened, you know, so I think what's necessary, I mean, I know when we first spoke about it in Canada, it's even longer, 25 years, so think about how far our money lasts for the archiving. I think most of us, to your point, we'll be retired and someone else will deal with it, but it's really hard even when you go to destroy it. Like, you're trying to reach out to someone at the sponsor, they're not even there.
Right.
So it's just, we need to really look at it, and especially with these new systems in place, is the data going to hold up in our e-systems? You know, 20 years of data, like what's that going to look like? So I'm really glad you're bringing this to the forefront, and let's have the conversation. And you know, in Canada, it's the sponsor's responsibility. So I think
not the
here's a
site's.
perfect example where the site's just, okay, we'll accept it.
Yeah, don't just say okay. Read
Yeah.
your contracts and understand it. You know, so many of them just say you'll keep them until the sponsor says you can destroy them. Well, then you admit that that's indefinite storage.
It's certainly
So,
burdensome
yeah.
on the site and the liability. So 2 years, I think, is appropriate, but the data shows you most people don't want to do it beyond that.
So the message is here is we really don't have consensus. Let's bring it to discussion. Let's talk about some solutions, and we will continue and have some programmings on the issue of record retention. So Jimmy, why don't you take technology?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, David. So technology, the answers to these survey questions were actually presented at our inaugural SCRS West conference last June out in Scottsdale, Arizona, my hometown, where we talked about innovation and technology. So these are survey results from that particular survey that we ran based on mostly 2022 and a little bit of early 2023 data. But the first question that I wanted to highlight for you all was around being approached by a sponsor or CRO to conduct a hybrid type trial. And we defined that for our survey takers as being one where some, but maybe not all of the visits are being conducted in a sort of a virtual environment, or maybe in the patient's home or some other location. Technology and service enabled is a term that you'll hear me use quite often. I know we're trying to get away from the DCT nomenclature, so that's a good learning for us. 73% said that they were, and of those 73%, 93% then ultimately participated in those kinds of trials. So as you can see, at least from our survey takers, the several hundred that took that technology-based survey, there's an appetite for this type of trial. Probably goes to speak to the level of experience that those sites have, as you saw in the data that Mike presented, as well as some of the regional influences that we have in our data as well. Ultimately, then, we asked them their top reasons for participating in those hybrid type trials, those tech-enabled studies. Most of them responded that it would be beneficial to their participants or their patients that they have in their community. We can bring the trial to them is a term that a statement that we hear used quite often. They also have the desire to bring their site into the future, or they felt it would be financially beneficial to them at the time. I think some of this data was very much influenced by the fact that not a lot of trials had quite kind of gained the momentum that we hear they have now. So sites were quite literally needing to participate in these types of studies to stay afloat. But also out of that 100% there, only 9% said that the technology was so easy, it was so simple to use. What are the reasons cited then for not participating in those types of trials? Most of them said that they simply weren't selected, but then, of course, 37% of them said low budget. And we'll talk a little bit about that in subsequent slides and what that really means and what that looks like for our site community. And then 11% said that they were not comfortable doing that type of trial. So Dr. Gunn, talk to us a little bit about your reaction to this data and maybe your perspective on participation or lack thereof, and what kind of things motivate you and your site.
Well, I certainly appreciate the forward thinking of bringing technology into research. That's a great thing. But I do think that we need some optionality. Not every site, not every community is going to be in tune with technology, and we have to appreciate that. Give me the choice, I'll tell you what works, and then we have a deal.
Absolutely, that's a great point. Karri, anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to take the I'm always about call to action, so sponsors, vendors, you know, can the sites be a part of that vendor selection process? And what kind of risk mitigation can be put into place when that technology doesn't work? You know, at this point, sites have incredible data at this point of what systems work, what don't work. And if there's extra issues, technology doesn't work, creates barriers for our patients from a screen failure perspective, then compensate the sites for that extra time and effort. That's really what we're asking for.
Dr. Audrey, where do you sit on these spectrums here?
I love technology, don't hear me wrong. I love e-source, I love e-reg, but for decentralized trials, I think that I hesitate a little bit. For our patients, the diverse population, the Hispanics, I'm talking about the Hispanics, they really love to go and see their doctor on every visit. Why? Because we have spent so many years making that connection, earning their trust, that at the time that if I'm going to tell my patient, you know what, just connect to the cell phone, just connect to the tablet, and we'll see each other, that will actually lose our connection. So we have worked a lot in order to get that trust and that connection with our patients, that just being behind a tablet, it doesn't work for our patients. So I would say decentralized trials are not for all the patients, are not for certain diversity groups.
It's a message we hear a lot, right? That theme of optionality. Let's use these tools, this technology, these services that we can bring into our clinical trials to provide optionality, not only to our sites, but also then to our patients. This is
Yes, one more.
Oh, yes, please.
Sorry, yes, I forgot to mention that also for technology, if we ask, we're targeting right now a Jewish community in New Jersey, and if we ask them to complete an e-diary for 7 days in a row, they will not be compliant because of the Shabbat. So they will go on the Shabbat from Friday to Sunday, and they won't be able to have access to technology. So that is something that we need to think when we talk about religious diversity, but we need to include them too.
Right.
It's a great point, Dr. Audrey. Thank you for adding that in, absolutely. Expectation versus experience. This is a question that we've asked since we've been asking questions about technology to kind of compare and contrast the two, because we as a community are still embarking on the journey of technology and service-enabled clinical trials. So when we look at the expectations, what did you expect to be a challenge for you as a site in participating in trials with technology and services, remote services enabled on them? Quality of data and staffing and supporting the technology were the expectations. But when we flip the coin a little bit and look at experience challenges, what rises to the top really centers around financial and compensation challenges, which goes to speak to some of that data that we saw on the previous slide. And then finally, some similarities between the two, things that sites not only expected, but then ultimately experienced as well. That was having the staff necessary to support the technology, but also then supporting the variety and the sheer number of technology and vendors that they're being asked to use to, again, facilitate the enablement of these types of trials. The golden question, right? What, as sponsors and CROs and really service providers, what can our industry partners do to support the sites? Starting from the bottom, I'll work my way up here. 74% reported stronger and more robust budgets. And what I like to contextualize this data around, because this has been a trend for a couple of years now as our number one answer, it doesn't just mean we need more money onto our clinical trials. It's not that we're not just getting enough money. We need to be reimbursed as sites for the true and real costs associated with participating in these types of trials. There are new things. Sites get it. Industry gets it. We're trying this out. We're still piloting a lot of these technologies and services on our studies. And we might not have all the answers for what it means from a costing and financial perspective. But what's really important here is that you are receptive to the feedback from the sites. When they tell you and they come back with their negotiations, or maybe it's even midstream in a study and something has inadvertently cost them a little bit more than they thought it was going to do, be receptive to that information, because again, as long as sites justify it appropriately, those are true and real costs at the site level. So let's keep that in mind as we're embarking on these clinical trials, maybe even past the point of final budget negotiation. Integrated and consistent technology. My friend Vivian Vanderwall likes to say, get me out of this bad escape room, right? We are, as sites, constantly being bombarded with all of this different technology that doesn't always speak to each other, right? We'll collect data in one place, we'll have to do duplicate data entry somewhere else, or the e-diary data will come through and we'll have to transcribe it into the EDC, et cetera, right? The systems, we need to move in the direction of integrating these systems and build in some consistency around what we're asking our sites to use. Some reliability. If I'm working with said sponsor on one trial within that therapeutic area, I hope that when I get that study again, I can rely on them to use the same technology, or at least something that's extremely similar, so that I don't have to go through this iteration process on new training, new technology, new systems every single time I do a study. And then finally, more effective patient technical support. We hear a lot that technical support is offered. It's a 1-800 number available in English only from the hours of 9 to 3 p.m. Eastern Time. I know a lot of you are global organizations. That really doesn't help the studies that you're doing outside of those time zones. If you had a study that was happening in Australia, that would be really not convenient for those patients having to get up at 1 a.m. to answer their questions, right? It's unreasonable for us to ask those things. So Dr. Audrey, can you kind of talk to and support with context maybe some of your experiences with the needs here from our partners?
I mean, I totally agree with this slide. I think that we really need more support when we're using a third vendor for, for technology, basically. A lot of the time it really doesn't work. The study coordinator will get burned because they have like zillion of queries because the data has not been transmitted. We contact our patients. The patient said, yes, I completed my surveys, but they have not been uploaded. So the patient will call one time to the support system, but since they don't speak Spanish, they will say, you know what, I need help. The coordinator then will call and will spend 2 hours resolving why the data is not being transferred. So I think that it really needs to be, sponsors need to be aware about how much of an effort the study coordinators and the site is putting in to conduct some clinical trials that have a lot of technology.
Right. I would say to the sponsor CROs, we have what's called mock trials at the sites, and we go through the experience that first visit. I would challenge you to go through that mock trial with the technology. I think it'll be incredibly, lots you'll learn from that experience. For the sites, I think now we're starting to collect deviations and technology. Right. We're itemizing it if it's technology causing the deviation, so you should be aware of that and reporting on that. And then ultimately, just let's not chase after that next shiny object, right? Like, there definitely are some technologies that are starting to get ahead. We've gone through the learning curve. Let's really focus on, enabling the sites, seeing the wins. We want to see the wins.
Right, that's great. Another question that we've asked for a couple of years now, the number of hours spent on training and training alone for trials with remote technology and enablement, and this is per study per month. What you're seeing here is that 40% of sites report that they spend somewhere between 5 and 15 hours per study per month, and 25% of our site respondents spend at least 15 hours, somewhere between 15 and 20 plus hours on training, again, with technology enablement per study per month, and the remaining percentage there falls underneath that 5-hour mark. But we've asked this question a couple of different ways in years past, and the average, at least last year in the data, was about 17.5 hours. It's a tremendous amount of time per study per month. That can be 1 or 2 individuals, sometimes 3 or 4, but a lot of time that could be spent. We've said it before for other things, recruiting patients, seeing patients, treating patients, solving technical issues and whatnot, but that we're spending training. And it really goes to underemphasize the point around being consistent with that. We can minimize some of this training, I think, if we start to build in some of those consistencies that we talked about here. Karri, is there anything you want to add around this?
I mean, this one's a sad one for me because I think since the first landscape survey, Michael, wouldn't you agree this has been always a pressing issue? Mm-hmm. Training, unpaid training. Yep. And so the sad reality is we're actually doing more training, so we've actually gotten worse. Right. And we're not getting paid. I do applaud the few sponsors and CROs that are actually starting to pay for training. I think that you really have to look at the amount of hours spent and the number of volume of staff that have to go through this training. And wherever we can make it less redundant, we have to accept that they've already gone through the training on a different trial. So let's really kind of make some changes here.
Yeah. And Karri and Jimmy, when you ask the sites, and we talked about this a lot at the Site Technology Conference, yeah, it's great that we get paid for the training, but you know what? We didn't get into this business to be in the training business.
Right.
We got into the business to run studies. So if we can right-size training is our preference within the sites. Let's right-size the training, get rid of the redundant, let's get rid of repetitive, only do what I need to do when I need to do it, et cetera.
Or
If we can right-size training,
versus naive
that's much
or native,
preferred
right?
than say, oh, we'll go all the other superfluous training, but we'll pay you for it. That's not the business we want to be in, but if we have to, then yeah, that fair compensation is necessary.
Technology adoption, we know that a lot of sites are starting to adopt their own technology, or at least planning to adopt their own technology. And again, we're looking at some very experienced sites here, but what you're seeing is kind of a comparison for 3 different types of technologies, kind of the big ones really that we see a lot of sites adopting here. Planned in the filled in graph versus what they actually have adopted. So 16% of sites have adopted eSource, and another 20% of them are planning to adopt that. 24% have adopted an e-regulatory solution, with another 8% planning to do so. And then finally, e-consent, with 13% having adopted an e-consent solution, with 22% having planned to adopt an e-consent solution. So if we're looking to get ourselves out there, maybe as a service provider, what the sites are really looking at paying attention to here from an adoption standpoint, eSource and e-consent are definitely the places that at least the sites responding to our survey are really interested in moving that needle and adopting their own technology. Is technology helping with diverse recruitment? So an interesting slide. It was a little bit shocking to present this data back in June, but what you're seeing are 2 different responses to a similar question. We asked our service providers to indicate if their solutions are designed with diversity, equity, and inclusion in mind, and 75% of those that responded said, yes, my solutions are diversity, equity, and inclusive focused. I have tools, we focus on that. Yet, only 18% of sites report that they see technology that has enabled their diverse patient recruitment. So a little bit of a disconnect when it comes to what's actually being built. Maybe there's some blinders on. We have a little bit more work to do from an industry service provider, technology partner perspective to enable technology from the site perspective. Dr. Gunn, any reactions to the data here?
Well, I'll say from experience, well, firstly, diversity is an action word. And it is not words on a page, it's not a bullet point, it's not a checkbox. It is intentional work, and it needs to be not just supported with technology, but it has to be supported with funds, it has to be supported with efforts, and it has to be long-term. One thing that I find often is sponsors say, well, can you recruit diverse populations? Or what can I do to help you? But they don't really give us a navigation plan, or it's just for the purpose of that one trial and not for the long haul. So I do want to say that although perhaps these technologies are helpful, but you can't geofence a community and serve them an ad and call that diversity. It's work.
Yes.
Dr. Audrey?
I totally agree with you, Dr. Gunn. I think that technology is great, but it's not for all our patients. It depends on who's your target population. If you're targeting certain diverse patients, I would say it can work, but it depends on who's your target population. I would go with the 18%. Definitely our community is more being in the community, seeing you every day and working with them. It takes years to gain that trust. It's not going to happen from one day to another. Technology is not going to work from one day to another. So I think that this is something that needs to be considered. Maybe technology is not for all diverse populations.
Great points. And the point that I want to emphasize here is that we have data to show that there's work that needs to be done here. And lucky for you all, you're here with a lot of really engaged sites that are willing to help you do this work, to figure this out, to make sure that your technology solutions are built with diversity, equity, and inclusion in mind. Summarizing a little bit of what we talked here, the budgets and contracts really are the big thing when it comes to the technology that we're implementing. We need to, as sites, understand our costs and provide appropriate justification for some of those non-standard costs, things that might be unique when it comes to adopting technology and services. But for our industry partners, provide the information sites need sooner. Give them who the vendor is going to be. Give them the information about what that technology is going to be so that they can then do that work to understand their costs. Integration and standards. Create opportunities, sites, to standardize your own technology. What can you do, even if it's just a small step internally, to work towards standardizing what you're using as an organization? We saw in the slides that there are a fair number of sites that are starting to do just that. Industries, again, standardizing your tech usage as well within your own organizations and starting to adopt some common solutions. Tackle the training. Track training requirements as sites. Recognize when that redundant training happens, jot it down, record it so that you can bring that back to your sponsor, CRO, and service provider partners and say, this is what this is costing me as a site from a time perspective. And then as for our industry partners, accept any previously completed training and recognize when that redundancy happens. Make that training a reasonable requirement, not a burdensome requirement. And then the guidance. We hear from a lot of sites that we are a little unsure about what it means to use remote services that are not physically within our location, or maybe something that we're employing from a home health perspective. Helping our sites understand what that means from a regulatory standpoint and from an ethics and standpoint is something that a lot of sites have asked for and could be tremendously helpful from an execution standpoint. Speaking to diversity, we do have some great data from the Diversity Summit that we were able to collect. As Mike had mentioned, each of our different units, our different summits has its own set of site landscape data. So we were lucky to be able to collect diversity data this year specific for that summit. We asked if they were aware of their country's regulations pertaining to diverse clinical trial enrollment. 62% of our respondents said that they were aware of that regulation as well as its intent. They've become educated in what it means to be a site focused on DE&I. 25% then said that they were aware, but they weren't exactly sure what it entailed. You know, we talk about it a lot here at SCRS. We want everyone to be aware of what it means and what that might entail for them, but there still are a few sites that aren't quite sure what that entails. And then 13% of sites, not an insignificant number in my opinion, are either aware or it doesn't apply to them. Maybe some of those sites that are in different geographic locations where DE&I isn't as much of a necessary focus from a trial execution standpoint. Does this guidance then help your ability to enroll diverse patients? 47% said maybe, so kind of going to speak to the unsuredness that a lot of sites have around what this guidance really means. 44% though, another good portion, said that they were, and just 9% said no, they didn't think it did. So sites are either on board, they do believe that it can help them, or they're just really not sure. Dr. Gunn, what camp, where do you sit with the diverse guidance and regulations?
I think we all have a pretty fair understanding about what the expectations are from legislation and FDA. But I do not feel that we have the tools to navigate that well. Mm-hmm. And again, it takes work, it's a lot of outreach efforts, and it goes beyond the trial. And that's the piece that I feel is missing, because it's always about how are we going to recruit for this study, rather than how do we equip you to continue to reach the populations that aren't represented and continue that work forward.
Great points. Thank you. Speaking to perception now, how about action? Is your site successfully representing diverse patient populations? 64%, thank goodness, say yes, they are. I think we do, again, are lucky to have the attention and the response from some very good sites, but it's great to see that 64% said yes and only 16% said no. Then again, another 48% of sites because of all the conversations we've been having as a community, are planning to modify their operations to address those increasing diversity-related trial requirements. So we see a lot of positive motion in the industry for sites to recruit diverse, equitous, and inclusive patient populations. Do you then have the support, to Dr. Gunn's point, needed for diverse patient recruitment? 60% of sites said that they do not. So between these two slides, it really tells me the story that a lot of sites are generally aware that they're doing what they can, but they're not truly getting the support that they need from our sponsor CRO and service provider partners to do this really well. Dr. Audrey, a site, you're part of Emerson, a site that is one of the out there facing organizations when it comes to diverse patient recruitment. Can you talk a little bit about what you're seeing here on the slides? How might you be receiving support from sponsors and CROs?
You know, I don't want to sound like a broken record. Financial is very important, but also if sponsors are not able to provide any financial aid, they can provide manpower. They can provide us with study coordinators from a third vendor that they're paying. I think that's a great asset for sponsors to help sites so we don't burn out our study coordinators, because we're talking about, when we're working with diversity, we're talking about extending our hours of operation. We're talking about, you know, working extra hours, and we're talking about working during weekends. We're flexible with our patients, but we really need to not burn all our study coordinators. So I think that a good help from the sponsors would be to provide us with an additional staff.
Excellent, great, a great example. Speaking to that, some other ways that industry can support our site partners here. Trial budget items, exactly what Dr. Audrey had mentioned. Items centered around diversity and inclusion in our clinical trials. Community engagement, support for engaging our local community, going out, doing what we need to do to make sure that our external communities in the long term are aware of clinical research as an enterprise. We're not talking study by study. We're not talking a one-off solution. We're talking about continuous community engagement. I know all three of my panelists have pounded that drum pretty consistently. And then finally, education. There's a lot of opportunity for us to provide educational resources and training that help our sites focus on diversity and really understand what that means. We talked a little bit about protocol needs. We know that a lot of what centers around diversity, equity, and inclusion has to do with the protocol. 25% of our sponsor and CRO respondents said that their protocols undergo diversity, equity, and inclusion-based reviews, while 69% are then updating their protocols and their protocol creation process to be more focused on DE&I. 65% of our respondents say that more than 20% of the tools and resources that are associated with their protocols have diverse, preclusive language in them. Again, more than 20% is reported by 65% of our respondents here. So that's a pretty significant number of resources, tools, questionnaires, patient diaries, anything, consents that have diverse, preclusive language in it. We need to make sure that we're considering what it means to engage some of those populations. And I'm sure my panelists up here could probably talk all day to that, and luckily we do have some sessions this weekend addressing some of those challenges here. And then, does the diversity capability affect site selection? I apologize for the cutoff here on the slide, but essentially what we did was we asked our sponsors and CROs, do you care whether sites are capable of enrolling diverse patient populations? 36% said that yes, it matters a significant amount to our organization whether or not sites can do that. 64% said that it was a good or small amounts, kind of sitting right there in the middle, maybe not the end-all be-all, but definitely something they take into consideration. But there wasn't a single sponsor CRO partner that answered our survey this year that said DE&I did not matter. So, message there to sites. Yay. We need to keep working on what it means for us to enroll diverse, equitous, and inclusive patient populations and build that into our feasibility and our site selection execution processes. All right, David, going to take us through some financial questions.
Sure. Thank you, Jimmy. So I'm going to blow through these relatively quickly because I know that we've talked a lot about site finances already, and there are multiple sessions throughout the rest of the conference talking about this because cash flow is the oxygen that keeps these studies going. If the site finances are suffering, the studies are suffering. So this is a question we've asked for many years. How much operating cash do you have? What's your rainy day fund? This is consistent to previous years. Very small percentage of sites, well, not very small, but 21% say, yeah, I can weather a 6-month type storm. But you still have a number of those sites that have less than a month or 1 or 2 months, and these are the ones that live paycheck to paycheck. And they are one canceled study, one delayed study, one late payment away from existential crisis within there or exiting the industry. So sites, make sure you are watching your finances, and then other payment terms for the incoming cash flow. We will have several slides on for that. Unfortunately, last year, 16% of the sites reported they had a net loss. This is not a sustainable business plan. So, 24% was the highest number, said that they had about a 16 to 20% net loss in 2022. Again, if your sites are underfunded, your studies are underfunded. I would dare say these didn't do a real good job on your studies. So, profit decrease is also something that's very challenging. 55% of the sites said that they had a decrease in profit year over year from 2021, 2022, or survey to survey date. And half of those experienced a greater than 20% profit decrease. So yeah, we've got to have some of these solutions talking about this. This is part of the meeting. We need to recognize this. We're changing and we're doing business differently, but we do have to have some fluidity and back and forth of understanding the new site dynamics. We are a valued partner in your supply chain of getting new medicines to market and to people. So when we are suffering, the studies are suffering. Accounts receivable. So, we'll talk a little bit about payment terms, like monthly payment terms, but even if you have monthly payment term in the agreement, sites are complaining, I'm not paid monthly, I'm still paid once every quarter or 9 months later or whatnot. So 26%, this is accounts receivable greater than 90 days. So this means it is 90 days past due. 26% of the sites said that they have 30 to 40% of their money that is waiting 90 days. Now, I'm in healthcare as my primary. Days over 40 are of concern. Accounts receivable days over 40. This is a number over 90 already. So yes, payment terms are an issue. We have to get the right terms, and then we have to get the right execution. I know we have other ways of working with sponsors and CROs that we're trying to make sure and call to the attention. This is a thing of the withhold, the whole 10%, 20% withhold or whatnot. Mike, you've studied this data for a while. Why don't you comment?
Thank you. I've been tracking this. I can get back to about 2009 when we have been tracking this. And so the question is in the survey is, of the contracts you negotiated in the prior year, what is the most common withholding percentage? And it goes from 0 up to beyond 20. So the top green line at the top in 2009 was the 11 to 15%, and that's rising up as a withholding percentage. The next, it starts at the red line starts at 44 and is dropping down that's the 6 to 10%. So you can see that about 20, is it 25? 20, yeah,
20.
it has 6 to 10% withholding as their most popular one. So currently this year, the most common withholding percentage is 11 to 15, and then 6 to 10. And 0 seems to, and remember, these are experienced sites, experienced contract negotiators that are still in this rut. 0 has been hanging around there, but from what I'm hearing, it's becoming a topic that is more hotly addressed than it has been in the past. So we've been looking for this information, and the higher percentages are thankfully quite low.
Yeah, we saw during COVID, SCRS was a big advocate of, hey, release your holdback money to your sites to keep them afloat, and we appreciate all the sponsors and CROs that did that. But we've seen this resurgence after COVID of trying to put that back in, so I don't know why cash flow is different. Cash flow is the oxygen for these studies. So, we ask sponsors, why do you hold it back? Well, because, we have to make sure you do everything at the end of the study, that you tidy up everything, do the drugs and whatnot. That's what the closeout fee is for. Say it. That's what the closeout fee is for, right? Not withheld money. Otherwise, you're asking us to be your chess champion with this set of pieces. You're holding back 10%. I don't need them after the game is over. When do I need them?
During the game.
Now, during the game, that helps me win. If I play Monopoly, I don't get $180 when I pass go and only 10% of the rent from everybody. And then when the game's packed up, here's the rest of your money. I need it during the game. Give us the money during the game. Give us all the tools we need to make your study successful.
Yep.
Monthly and quarterly payment terms. Mike?
Payment terms, another one we've been tracking forever. This, I think, was probably one of the first big issues we took on even prior to SCRS, and we were doing the survey and just going around doing little meetings and things, the summits. But they started little, they got bigger. And you can see I guess the question is, what is the most common payment term in the budget you negotiated last year? So we can see from 2009, it's risen to monthly and crossed the quarterly line. So quarterly is on the outs. We have some other payment schedules that we ask in the survey, but they're just so unpopular. These are the big ones that we see. So this is, when I talk about getting involved, this is where it really kicks in. Because once everybody's talking about something like this, it really happens. So thanks all of you for contributing to the surveys and helping us with the monthly payment.
And thanks to all the sponsors and CROs out
Yes.
there that have enacted this change. Quarterly payments are not the norm, despite what everybody will say. It is not. We have data that shows this. And if you play Monopoly, you get your money, when I land on something and you pay me rent, I don't get paid every third turn, I get paid every turn, right? So, think about Monopoly. I'm not withholding the money, I'm getting paid every turn. That's how I win the game. So this has been stressful.
Right?
So everybody just, let me calm down for a second. So everybody breathe with me, all right? Inhale. Exhale. Inhale. Exhale. All right, inhale. Now keep this pattern going, because I'm going to change it up a little bit. Inhale, exhale, exhale, exhale. Inhale, exhale, exhale, exhale. Now, how would you prefer your studies to do? You'd breathe every third breath in versus out? No, we need oxygen. We have cash flow that's strong that keeps us healthy to do the studies. So we'll move on from that now because I don't want to get stressed out. And plus, the SCRS lawyers have advised me to not do a breathing exercise on holdbacks. As far as invoiceables, many of you know last year we put out our invoiceables document of many of the common invoiceables from everything. We have asked the sites, what are you getting? So, it's the old, you're the only site asking for that. No, you're not. These are the common invoiceables, and the invoiceables are things that occur when they occur. Sometimes they occur for every study, sometimes they're study specific, but these are the ones that the sites are getting. You'll have access to the slides. We will have a session tomorrow, or a breakout session on invoiceables. If you're interested in invoiceables and these so-called hidden costs, please come to it. And then later on, these are the ones that are least common. Now, many of them are not applicable by sites, and many sites aren't asking for these, and these are common things that are germane to conduct of studies. So if you're interested in invoiceables and hidden costs and how you can build those into budgets, and sponsors and CROs, how you can say, hey, these are legitimate costs of the study. It's not a crazy, weird thing to go forward. So the key takeaways are here. It summarizes the slides, but I know that we're always going to fight over budgets. Negotiation, if only one person walks away happy, it was a failure. But we can take this opportunity, as we have in the past, and continue to get rid of the dumb negotiating things, come to agreement on that, and then we can focus on the more complex things. What do y'all think?
Agreed.
Absolutely.
I totally
Absolutely.
agree.
Okay. Any comments on anything further on finance that we missed?
I would just say I challenge the sponsors who are paying quarterly to pay their staff quarterly. Let's see what happens.
And your electric bill quarterly.
Exactly.
I find it real unfortunate that many of the sites are operating on fumes or just a few months. Research is so critical, and we have to demand that the payments are made timely and be aggressive about it.
Yes.
And I would just say from the AR perspective, this is experienced sites answering it. I think it's even higher. I think there's a lot of unknown money that's been left on the table, and that's another thing that we need to focus on. We literally have our own working committee at our own job, find the money. because it's just it's so complex when you look at every individual contract and all the different invoiceable items. If you don't have a great system to track it, you're leaving the money on the table.
And if you're a site that likes to be paid once a quarter, we know there's some of them out there. Get paid monthly and just don't go to the bank but once a month.
All right, employee retention, just a few slides here around turnover rate and what we're doing. We've heard consistently that employee retention is a tremendous challenge. We see a lot of people exiting the industry, but 63% of companies track their turnover rate. 25% or so then don't, and the remainder there is maybe that unknown whether they track that or not, so just not applicable to them. So it's great to see that so many of you are tracking your turnover rate, but in today's day and age, I think it is something that we absolutely need to continue to pay attention to as an industry, so that when we do go for help from our industry partners, we're able to do that a little bit more effectively. Turnover rate in the last couple of years. 40% of sites report that their turnover rate has been higher in the last 2 years. Probably doesn't come as a surprise, I hope, to most of you who have been attending SCRS summits, attending webinars and whatnot, because we talk about this a lot. We've done a lot of work, put out a lot of resources here to not only advise our industry on what that means and what that looks like, but also what we can do to help support sites who need to bolster their site staff and support the trials that you're asking them to conduct. 34% said that it was the same, and 26% said that their turnover rate was lower in the last couple of years. So I'm hoping that we start to see some of this data shift in the other direction as we continue to build on the initiatives, some great initiatives that are out there in the industry. What are the reasons that our site staff give us for leaving? More attractive offers elsewhere. Elsewhere is a broad term, but we've heard things like sponsors and CROs. They're leaving to our sponsor and CRO partners. They're also leaving to Target. So it's not just the sponsors and CROs, but we do hear that a lot of individuals are being recruited away from sites, unfortunately, pursuing different careers or roles. They're just wanting to do something different, get out of research altogether. And then a lack of work-life balance or job misrepresentation. They're not exactly sure once they embark on this path of research that it's really for them. They're not getting what they need out of it. Additionally, some other things we wanted to just briefly mention. Concerns about the company's prospects or financial health were some reasons some individuals gave for leaving, as well as no flexible working options. It's tough, I think, in a lot of places for a coordinator to work from home. Probably not. Dr. Audrey shaking her head. And then poor company culture. So a lot of work for us to do, but if we want to look at that low-hanging fruit here, it's number 1, 2, and 3. Most sites, as we're seeing, do track their turnover rates, with data showing rates have been increasing recently. But Karri, maybe talk a little bit about what you're seeing from an employee retention standpoint.
I mean, this is probably one of the most important things from the site perspective. How do you keep that experienced coordinator working? It's, you have cash flow issues, and then if your coordinator leaves, it can take 6 months to a year to get that coordinator back up. There's some great sessions this weekend. I would encourage you to go and talk. There are wonderful ideas on what you can do to create a holistic package that helps keep your person working there. Sometimes there's challenges. I can't compete with that pharma salary, and that's maybe part of the growth evolution of your people in of itself. So you have to have a really robust onboarding training program. There's a whole session related to that. It's important to understand why your people are leaving. I see right now challenges. We've gone through so much disruption for change, with eSource, eReg. The systems aren't perfect. We need all our vendors to work with us to improve the process, simplify the process. Some of that workload burden is the complexity that we've created. So we do have to simplify it. One of my takeaways already, we're just starting the session, is creating a customer advisory board of my key, vocal staff members that are there in it and really saying what really is taking so much time, cumbersome, creating that burnout, that workload kind of perspective, and let's try to figure out how we can actually impact and change it.
Great, thanks, Karri. Well, I think that's a really great place for us to start to conclude here with some of our considerations around retention. Offer competitive compensation and benefits. I realize it's easy to say and much tougher to do, but this is something that we need to work with our partners in the industry who are that financial flow, that lifeblood, the oxygen of our sites, to be able to make sure that we're promoting that work-life balance, finding unique ways, I think, to do this. It doesn't always just mean remote work, but there are new and effective ways in modern times for us to enable this for our staff. And then finally, developing retention bonuses. Maybe there's ways for us to build in longevity appreciation for some of our staff here. Back one. Well, with that, everyone, let's please join me in a round of applause for our co-panelists up on stage.
Thank you. And let's make sure we celebrate our successes. We've had some successes. We still have some work to do, and that's what the next 2 days are for. Bring your solutions to the table. Let's go ahead and solve these problems. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.